The sky cracked open with a roar that rolled like drums across the New Mexico territory. Rain fell in silver sheets, washing the red dust from the parched earth, and lightning forked over the mesa like veins of fire. A man stood alone on the edge of a scrub field, hat clutched in his hands, soaked to the bone. The wooden cross before him was simple, weather-worn and unadorned save for a single name burned into it, Sarah Cade. Beside it, a smaller cross, barely taller than a boot. He didn't cry. He never did, not anymore. The tears had come like a flood the first night, then vanished into the dry ache of survival. Elijah Cade had once been a man people respected, former Union scout, rancher, husband. But the land didn't care for titles. Neither did loss. After Sarah died in childbirth and the infant followed her before his first breath, something hollow took Elijah's place. He kept the ranch, though. Half the cattle were stolen or dead, and the last good field was burned in a summer fire sparked by lightning and dry winds. The house leaned to one side now. The barn groaned when the wind blew just right. The locals whispered about the widower who wouldn't leave, and more than one drunk spat out his name with pity or contempt. That morning, Elijah had found a coyote tangled in barbed wire near the northern fence. It thrashed weakly as he approached, one leg already gnawed to bone. He considered shooting it. Instead, he knelt down, cutting the wire slow and steady. The coyote didn't bite or growl, just stared with dead eyes, resigned. He carried it to a shaded ditch and gave it water, but it died by dusk. He buried it, without ceremony. Life here didn't lend itself to ceremony anymore. The rain broke by noon, leaving behind the metallic scent of wet earth and something else, something unfamiliar. He smelled smoke, not fire, not yet. Campfire, maybe. He squinted, toward the south ridge, where the hills met the high desert and the wind moved like a living thing. That's when he saw her. The horse came first, a wild Mustang, ash gray with a mane like tangled silver. It bucked and screamed, kicking up dirt in every direction, eyes wide and panicked. Behind it rode a figure draped in a heavy oilskin duster, chasing the animal with a rope in one hand and wild determination in her seat. Elijah stepped off his porch, rifle in hand, not to threaten, but to understand. Outsiders didn't just appear out here, especially not alone. The woman rode like someone who'd taught herself too late, off balance, forceful but committed. The Mustang turned suddenly, hooves slicing air, and the woman lost her grip. She hit the ground hard. The horse wheeled again, charging back toward her prone body. Elijah moved without thinking, dropped the rifle, sprinting. Gravel tore into his boots, lungs burning from sudden effort. He caught the Mustang's halter as it veered toward the woman, grabbed a handful of bristled mane and twisted. The horse jerked sideways, nearly dragging him, but Elijah held. His shoulder dislocated with a sickening pop. He didn't let go. The Mustang gave one last scream, then bolted into the brush, reins flying. Elijah fell to one knee, cradling his arm. The woman sat up slowly, dazed, a streak of blood above her brow. "I didn't ask for help," she said, voice hoarse. He spat blood into the dirt. "Then you shouldn't have needed it." She stared at him, something unreadable flashing behind storm-gray eyes. She wore no ring. Her face was angular, hardened by travel. Mud streaked her cheek, and her hair, once pinned back, now hung in wet ropes. She stood on her own, limping slightly but with pride intact. "You always charge down hills at stray horses?" she asked. "Only when they're about to trample fools." She huffed a humorless laugh, then moved to gather her saddlebag, which had landed nearby. Elijah said nothing more, cradling his arm, teeth gritted against the pain. She approached, offered no thanks, but reached out and snapped his shoulder back into place with surprising precision. He stifled a yell. "Had brothers," she said simply. "Broken more bones than they ever did fences." He stood slowly, rotating the joint. Painful, but usable. "You got a name?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, turning toward his cabin. "And you're on private land." "I'm not staying," she said. "Just passing through." "Good," he muttered. "Then keep passing." He left her there in the mud and walked the 50 paces to his porch, where he retrieved the rifle and stared down the ridge. She watched, Him, warily, until he vanished behind the door. She didn't leave. That night he heard her fire crackling near the edge of his property line, close enough for safety, far enough for pride. He watched through a sliver in the shutters, unsure what to make of her. A woman alone in a land like this either had guts or secrets, probably both. She stayed 3 days. He didn't ask her why. She didn't offer. She built a corral out of fallen branches and practiced roping an old fence post. Every evening she rode out to find the Mustang. Every evening she returned alone. Elijah worked his fields with a broken hoe and a rusted plow, pretending not to notice her. But each night he left something by her camp. Once a half loaf of bread, once a clean bandage, once a jar of honey he hadn't opened in years. She never thanked him, but none of it was returned. On the 4th morning, she knocked on his cabin door, not loud, not timid either. He opened it halfway, rifle slung over one shoulder. "I need rope," she said. He stared. Half-mile west, mustangs caught in a gulch, alive but tangled in brush. "I can't lift him alone. Should have let it go." "Maybe," she said. "But I didn't." He grabbed his gloves and followed. The gulch was narrow, steep-sided, and choked with old roots and dry branches. The Mustang lay half-splayed at the bottom, flank heaving, one leg caught. It saw them and tried to bolt, but pain held it down. They worked in silence. Elijah cleared the path. She tied a harness. The horse thrashed, but she touched its muzzle and whispered something. Something soft, foreign. It stilled. Elijah wrapped the rope around his waist and pulled as she guided the hooves clear. An hour later, the horse stood on trembling legs. Free. She named it Hollow. "You name your animals after how you feel?" he asked, smirking despite himself. She didn't answer. They walked back together as dusk bled across the hills. Her face looked younger in that light, softer. He realized he hadn't spoken this many words to another soul in over a year. "I'm Annie," she said, as they reached the edge of his fence. He didn't offer his name, but he said, "You can use the barn if you're staying longer." Her nod was grateful but wordless. That night she slept among the hay, Hollow tethered nearby, and Elijah sat by his window, watching the stars pulse between moving clouds. He didn't sleep much. By morning he noticed something strange. The corner of his field bore a stake he hadn't driven, thin, fresh wood with a strip of red cloth tied around it. He followed its line and found 2 more, forming a triangle, that crossed his southern acreage. He'd seen markers like that before, not from ranchers, from land surveyors. That afternoon a man arrived dressed like a banker with a crooked tie and a polished cane. He brought papers, said he represented interests back east, and that the land was changing hands. He said the previous owner, Elijah's grandfather, had defaulted on a tax bond, and the territory courts now recognized a deed transfer to a new proprietor. Elijah took the paper and read what he could. The name at the bottom was printed clearly, Annika Gray. He stared at the letters. Cold fury bubbled behind his ribs. He found her feeding Hollow near the barn, humming something under her breath. She didn't look surprised when he stormed toward her. "You bought my land?" he asked. She paused. "I did." "You knew I was here?" "I did." He swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because if I didn't, Royce Leland would have taken it. And he doesn't ask politely." His stomach turned. Royce Leland, ex-Confederate, captain-turned-raider, a man who cleared land with fire and bullets. "You came here with your name buried and your truth tucked in your boot. You used me," Elijah said, eyes hard. "I came here to protect what was already mine," she said quietly. "But I didn't lie. I just didn't explain." He stared at her, the silence between them heavy as stone. Then he turned and walked toward the grave markers in the distance, fists clenched at his sides. Behind him, Annie called out, not loud but firm, "I don't want to take anything from you, Elijah. I want to build something that's worth keeping." He didn't stop, walking, But he heard the crack in her voice, and for the first time in months he felt something stir beneath the ash. The Mustang neighed softly, wind catching its mane, and the light touched the land in long gold streaks. Something was coming. Elijah could feel it in his bones, and this woman, this stranger with storms in her eyes, was right in the middle of it. Morning came cold and clear, with frost kissing the edges of the tall grass. Elijah stood by the fence line, mug of bitter coffee in hand, watching Annie lead Hollow in slow circles around the makeshift corral. The Mustang still bristled at her, touched but no longer bucked in blind terror. There was something in the animal's eyes. Caution, yes, but also recognition. Like it knew the sound of her voice, the way her fingers gently touched behind its ears. Elijah didn't understand horses the way she did, not anymore. But he understood people well enough to know she wasn't simply taming the Mustang. She was trying to steady something inside herself. He hadn't spoken to her since the day he found his land had changed hands without his knowing. The air between them held weight, like storm clouds refusing to break. Annie acted as if nothing had shifted. She still worked through dawn, boiled water for coffee they both drank in silence, and left food in a shared space between the barn and house. She'd taken to sleeping in the loft above the animals, Hollow just below her, straw scattered like snow on her bedroll. Elijah tried to stay away, but the thing about silence was that it gave shape to everything else. Her presence had become a part of the land now, just like the wind, just like the brittle trees. He couldn't ignore her. He caught her reading one afternoon, hunched over, a thick ledger at the back of the barn, ink stains on her thumb. The book was filled with property lines, court letters, legal notations that he couldn't decipher, but recognized all the same. She had every acre marked. His, too. "I never meant to trick you," she said without looking up. "The sale went through 2 months before I got here. I didn't expect you to still be living on it." "You could have said something the moment you rode in." "I could have. But you weren't in a state to hear it." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it cut all the same. He walked away without responding. The next few days bled together in routines that no longer felt separate. Elijah repaired fence posts near the south border. Annie collected wild herbs in a leather pouch and added them to the stew that simmered at night. Hollow, now tethered without resistance, followed her like a shadow. They didn't talk much, but there were glances, careful, lingering, each one a question neither dared to ask. That quiet truce was broken one dusty afternoon when a rider appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the sun. Elijah spotted him first. Lean, cruel posture, military straight back. The horse he rode was too well fed for these parts. Elijah met him halfway up the road, rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. "Royce Leland," Elijah muttered, squinting. "The rider smiled without warmth. "Been some time, Cade. Thought you were dead." "Been trying." Royce dismounted, dusted off his coat. His revolver was polished, his boots newer than most folks could afford. "I'm here as a courtesy," he said. "This land's under new ownership. You're trespassing." Elijah crossed his arms. "I know who owns it." Royce raised a brow. "Then you know she's not going to keep it. Girl like that. She doesn't understand the rules out here. And you're not in a position to fight for it. She doesn't need to understand the rules. She just needs to know how to stand her ground." Royce laughed, low and sharp. "That what you're doing, Cade? Standing your ground for a woman who took your name off the title? I'm standing because I don't like your smell on my wind." They stood like that for a moment, guns still holstered but hands twitching. Then Royce turned, spat into the dirt. "We'll be back. With paper, with guns, with more men. Tell your new friend the law is not on her side, and neither is time." When Royce rode off, Annie was already waiting by the fence. She didn't ask what was said. She already knew. Elijah didn't speak either. He just watched her face, stone still, unreadable, and then turned back to the barn. Later, she came to him by firelight. "I knew Royce might come," she said. "He's tried to take half of Hidalgo County with forged deeds and broken bodies." "You picked a hell of a place to plant roots," Elijah said. She looked into the flames. My father owned land from here to Kansas. After the war, they came for it. Every piece. Said we didn't deserve it. Said we'd taken it with blood. Maybe they were right. You were a child. And now I'm not. And I have enough money and enough ink to start reclaiming what was ours. Quietly, legally. If I can stay long enough to keep hold of it. You're a long way from the east. Not far enough. Elijah nodded, slow. He understood more than he admitted. They spent the next day reinforcing the barn doors and digging trenches by the east gate. Annie worked like someone who'd never been given time to learn fear. Hollow stood sentinel watching everything. Elijah hadn't seen a horse behave like that in years. That night, he found her walking alone through the graveyard, his makeshift resting place for Sarah and the child. She carried no torch, just walked between the crosses with hands tucked into her coat. I had a brother, she said when she noticed him. Younger. Died at Antietam. Mother never forgave the Union. Father drank himself out of memory. Me, I just kept moving. He said nothing. They stood in that cold silence, the kind that seeped into the lungs. After a while, she asked, "Did you love her?" "Sarah? More than I thought I could." Annie looked down at the grave. "I don't think I ever loved anyone like that," she said. "Not even close." "You don't have to." She glanced at him. "But I want to." He looked away. "That's harder." The next morning, the world shifted. Elijah woke to the sound of iron against wood. Someone at the gate. He grabbed the rifle, boots half-laced, and stepped outside. 3 riders. Not Royce, but one of his men, Gallo Finch, thick-necked and scarred, across the chin. Known for breaking knees over card debts, 2 others with him, armed. "You've got till nightfall," Gallo said. "Either she signs over the deed or we start clearing the land the old-fashioned way." Elijah didn't lower the rifle. "You think I won't shoot you where you stand?" Gallo smirked. "I think you're the kind of man who buries too many people to pull the trigger again." Annie appeared behind him, shotgun in her hands. "I've buried enough," she said. "One more won't ruin my sleep." Gallo raised his hands, mock surrender. "Suit yourselves. You want a war over dirt, you'll get one." They rode off without a fight, but the message was clear. That night, Annie loaded her revolver while Elijah checked the fence lines. No one spoke. Not until Hollow started pacing. The animal felt it before they did. Someone was watching. Waiting. They set up shifts, trading sleep for tension. By morning, no attack had come. But every crow overhead, every coyote call from the ridge sounded like a countdown. Annie found Elijah by the edge of the property, staring at the surveyor stakes. "You still think I should have left?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "No. I think maybe you were meant to come." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because for the first time since Sarah died, I remembered what it feels like to have something worth losing again." The wind picked up, tugging at her coat. She stepped closer. "If Royce comes back, we fight together," she said. He nodded. She added quietly, "And if he doesn't, we still have to figure out what we are." "We're survivors," Elijah said. "Everything else, we build from there." In the distance, the sun dipped low, setting fire to the horizon. And as it fell, the shadow of a storm crawled up behind it. Neither of them spoke the fear they felt, but they knew. The next time Royce came, it would be with fire, bullets, and a hunger that only destruction could feed. Still, Annie stood tall beside Elijah, fingers brushing the worn stock of her revolver. And in that quiet, in that dusk-heavy moment, the Mustang neighed once and stilled. They weren't running anymore. The moon hung low and bruised in the sky, casting long silver shadows across the fields. Elijah lay in the barn loft, rifle across his chest, eyes open, ears tuned to every creak and whisper of wind. Below him, Hollow shuffled restlessly in, his stall sensing the tension. Annie sat near the door, cross-legged, coat draped over her knees, a book open in her lap, but unread. Neither of them had slept. Neither dared. The last 2 days had been quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace but like a held breath just before the blow landed. Elijah had begun laying sandbags by the southern gate, stacking them in uneven rows. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but some instincts never faded. He'd used the same patterns near Chattanooga, building defenses for men who didn't make it to sunrise. The way he moved now, efficient, unthinking, wasn't for Annie's sake or the land. It was the rhythm of a man who'd buried too many friends to leave anything to chance. Annie, for her part, had begun storing supplies, salted meat, tins of beans, water flasks wrapped in cloth to stay cool. She was methodical, precise. Her journal, once filled with land records, now included sketches of the property with marked blind spots, lines of fire and escape routes. There was no panic in her, only purpose. They'd spoken only in fragments since Gallo's warning. "He'll come at night," Elijah had said once, leaning against the porch rail. She nodded. "Or dawn. That's when fear hits hardest." The waiting stretched thin between them like worn rope, and yet there were moments, small, fleeting, where the edges softened. One morning, Elijah caught her humming as she brushed Hollow's mane, a tune so faint it almost wasn't there. When he stepped closer, she stopped. "Didn't know horses liked music," he said. "They don't," she replied without looking up. "But I do." He smiled, barely. "You don't say much unless it matters." "I used to talk a lot," she murmured. "Didn't get me far." That was the rhythm of them now, guarded, sharpened by solitude. But something was forming beneath the surface, an understanding too delicate to name. Then, as if summoned by the rising tension in the air, Royce returned. It was near sunset when the dust cloud bloomed on the eastern trail. 7 riders this time, maybe more, with rifles slung and bandoliers full. At their center rode Royce, draped in black, a smirk curled under his mustache. He didn't stop at the fence. Elijah met him in the open, just beyond the cattle path, his boots firm in the dirt, rifle loose in his grip, but ready. Royce slowed his horse. "You get my message? I got your threat." Same thing. Behind Elijah, Annie stepped into view. She wore her coat like armor, hat brim low, shotgun at her side. Royce's eyes narrowed. "Miss Gray, I expected you'd have packed your things by now." "I don't run from rats," she said. He chuckled. "You know the courts won't come this far. No marshal's gonna ride out for you, and I'm not a man known for patience." "You're not known for much but burning things that don't belong to you," Elijah cut in. "You want the land? Come take it." Royce's smirk faded. "You've got until sundown tomorrow. After that, there'll be no warnings." He turned his horse without another word, the others trailing behind, hooves pounding like war drums, The dust settled. Elijah looked at Annie. Her jaw was clenched tight, her fingers white around the shotgun grip. "We could leave," he said, not with fear but honesty. "And do what?" she asked. "Hide for the rest of our lives?" He looked, out at the fields, his once, now hers, now theirs. "No," he said. "We stay." They didn't speak much that night, too busy preparing for the inevitable. Elijah climbed onto the roof with a pair of old binoculars, scanning the dark ridges. Annie set traps along the low path, a trick she'd learned from someone unnamed in Missouri. Simple, brutal contraptions, wire, spikes, broken glass buried in shallow dirt. When they did finally speak, it was beside the fire, the barn door bolted shut, Hollow standing, calm as stone nearby. "You think we'll survive this?" she asked quietly. Elijah didn't answer right away. "I don't know, but I've died once already, Annie. The day I buried Sarah, something in me stopped breathing. This feels like life again, even if it's hard, even if it ends bloody." She turned to him then, something in her eyes cracking open. "I didn't know if I could trust you," she said. "I've seen men smile while they lied through their teeth, but you never tried to fool me. You just let me see who you are." "And who's that?" A man who still fights for things even when he knows how it might end. He didn't speak, just nodded, slow. That was all she needed. At dawn, the storm came. It wasn't thunder and rain. It was horses and dust and the glint of rifle barrels. In the sun. Royce brought 10 men this time, all of them armed and hungry for violence. Elijah fired the first shot. A rider dropped, his scream lost in the thunder of hooves. Chaos followed. Yells, gunfire, smoke rising in twisted ribbons. Annie took position behind the barn, shotgun blasting, reloading fast with hands practiced by fear and necessity. Hollow bolted once but stayed close, dodging between the posts, a ghost among the haze. Elijah fought with a calm honed by years of loss. His aim was precise. 2 more fell, but they kept coming. Gallo tried to flank from the west gate, but stepped into one of Annie's traps. His leg snapped like dry kindling. He howled, tried to crawl until she put a bullet through his shoulder. The battle was ugly, personal, close. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, only 3 of Royce's men remained standing. 2 fled on horseback, bleeding, heads low. Royce stood alone near the fence line, blood staining his sleeve, gun empty. Elijah approached, rifle leveled. Annie walked behind him, silent, eyes locked on Royce. The outlaw smiled through cracked lips. "You gonna hang me?" "No," Elijah said, "but you're done. Next time you show your face near this land, it'll be the last thing you see." Royce sneered. "You're still not the law." "No," Annie said, "we're worse. We're the people who fought to keep what's ours." He looked between them, scoffed, and stumbled toward his horse, mounting with effort. As he rode off, Annie raised her rifle but didn't fire. Elijah watched her lower it slow. "He'll come back," Elijah said. "Maybe," she replied, "but not today." They stood in the wreckage of what they'd defended. Bullet holes scarred the barn. Blood soaked the dirt. Hollow limped slightly but stood proud, like he knew the fight had meant something. Annie breathed deep, sweat and smoke clinging to her skin. "I never thought I'd get to keep it," she whispered. "You did more than keep it," Elijah said. "You made it worth fighting for." For the first time since she arrived, Annie smiled, not bitterly, not carefully. It was soft, real. They buried the dead near the creek bed, marked them with stone, not names. Later, sitting beneath the wide oak near the house, Elijah poured them each a cup of coffee, dark and strong. "This place is yours now," he said. "No," she replied, eyes on the horizon. "Ours, if you want it." He didn't answer, but he stayed beside her as the wind shifted, and the land, still blood-warm, slowly remembered peace. The fight was over, but something new had just begun. The days that followed were quieter than either expected, not the tense, hollow silence of dread, but the hush that comes after the scream has died, when the dust settles and the wounded breathe again. The scars left behind were real, deep, but the land stood, and so did they. Elijah spent the mornings walking the edges of the property, checking traps, repairing what had been broken, splintered rails, burned posts, shattered windows. Every step he took reminded him that he was still here, still alive. The rifle now leaned unused against the porch, gathering a film of dust and disuse, while his hands bore the marks of hammer and nail instead of blood and powder. He wasn't sure what that meant yet, but he didn't mind not knowing. Annie had begun planting. She said little about it, but every morning before the sun fully rose, she'd be out by the small patch of cleared soil near the barn, sleeves rolled. To her elbows, fingers buried in the earth. Carrots, beans, maybe corn if the rains came early. Elijah watched her from the porch, always at a distance, always waiting for her to say something that would anchor him in place. But Annie never spoke without reason. That, he'd come to understand, was her way. It was late one afternoon when she finally broke the quiet. "I read your name in an old ledger," she said, kneeling in the soil. "Before I came here," he paused, boot caught halfway in a stirrup. "You were listed as owner, along with your wife." The deed was signed just a year before she passed. Elijah said nothing, just watched her hands as they moved carefully over the rows. I tried to find you, she continued, to tell you what was happening, but I only found a death notice. It wasn't yours. It was hers. I figured you'd left, or didn't care anymore. I cared, Elijah said, voice low. But after she died, I didn't have the strength to fight for land that no longer felt like home. Annie stood and dusted her hands. It never stopped, being yours, Elijah. I just bought the paper. You gave it soul. He stepped down from the porch, walking slow toward her. I'm not the same man who signed that deed. No, she said, meeting his gaze. You're better, stronger, because you learned how to bleed and keep walking. They stood close now, the sun cutting long shadows behind them. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing dirt and callus. But, before either could speak again, the dog barked, a low, warning growl from the far hill. Elijah turned instinctively. The ridge. Movement. He grabbed the rifle from the porch and moved toward the tree line, Annie just behind him with her revolver drawn. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. It wasn't Royce. Elijah knew that even before he saw the face. A single rider came into view, leading a weary-looking mule. His coat was ragged, hat brim torn, and his face, brown, scarred, streaked with sun, was all angles and unreadable calm. Elijah didn't lower the rifle. Keep coming, and you better mean peace. The rider stopped, raised a hand. I mean, trade, the man said, voice like gravel. And water. Annie stepped forward. Who are you? He dismounted slowly without reaching for the weapon at his hip. Name's Dasa. I was a scout in the war. Spent 3 years running messages through land you wouldn't send a ghost through. Been tracking a band of stragglers, men who ran from something up north and now think they can carve blood trails down here. Bandits? Elijah asked. Worse, Dasa said. Vets who didn't learn anything but killing. They'll find this place before long. Your fight with Royce stirred the hornets, now they're flying. Elijah lowered the rifle just slightly. How many? 10. Maybe more. Maybe less. But they ain't like Royce. Royce wanted land. These men want chaos. Fire. They move at night. Burn what they can't take. Annie glanced at Elijah. We just rebuilt, she said softly. Elijah met Dasa's eyes. You came to warn us? I came to see if it's worth warning you, Dasa replied. Most folks run or die. I want to see if you're the third kind. That night they lit only one lantern, kept inside the barn, windows shuttered. Dasa sat with them by the low-burning fire. Hollow stood near Annie, ears flicking, tail still. You ride alone? She asked him. Dasa nodded. Always have. Why help us? He shrugged. I don't like seeing good earth soaked in bad blood. Elijah studied the man's hands, scarred but steady. You know how to fight? He asked. I know how to win. They made a plan before sunrise. Dasa mapped the bandits' likely path with a stick in the dirt. Elijah fortified the western rise, the most likely entry point. Annie rigged the barn with makeshift traps, wires strung between beams, shards of glass near the fence, and oil poured under the gate to make footing treacherous. By the second night, the air tasted like tension again. Hollow whinnied low, pacing. The dog didn't bark. He just stared out into the dark and trembled. They came in just past midnight. The first one tried to sneak through the field, stepped on a buried rake, and screamed loud enough to wake the dead. That was the signal. Elijah fired from the loft, catching one in the shoulder. Dasa moved like a ghost, quiet and quick, knife in hand. He took down 2 before they even realized he was there. Annie stood her ground at the back gate, firing the shotgun with both hands. One man rushed her and met the butt of the stock to his teeth. She didn't flinch. They kept coming. Shouts. Gunshots. The fire started. Someone tossed a torch toward the barn, but it landed in the trough. Hollow kicked his stall open and bolted into the chaos, hooves flashing. One of the attackers tried, to grab his reins and got a broken jaw for the effort. Elijah ran out of bullets before it was over. He fought the last one hand to hand, bare fists in fury. Dirt flew. Blood sprayed. In the end, Elijah stood over the man, chest heaving, knuckles torn raw. When the smoke lifted, 5 men lay dead. 3 had fled. 2 were captured, tied to a post. Groaning, Dasa walked past them with a nod. "You're the third kind," he said. Elijah dropped to his knees near the barn, not from wounds, just from the weight of it all. Annie found him there. She sat beside him, brushing back his hair. "I thought we were done fighting," he whispered. "We are," she said. "This wasn't a fight. This was a reckoning." He looked at her, eyes glassy with exhaustion and something deeper. "I would have died for this land," he said. "But now, I think I want to live on it." Annie smiled, leaned in close. "Then let's make something worth living for." The sun rose slow and pink, touching the edges of the battered house, the cracked fences, the field torn by hoof and flame. It touched the graves. It touched Hollow, blood-specked but calm. It touched Dasa, who stood on the hill with his mule, ready to ride again. He turned, gave them a nod. "You won't see me again," he said. "But you'll feel me here if danger comes." And then he was gone, a ghost back into the wild. Annie and Elijah stood together, arms brushing. The land stretched before them, quiet now but still breathing, still alive. The Mustang wandered toward them, nuzzled Annie's shoulder. They would rebuild. Not just the fences, not just the barn. Themselves. This place. Not all wounds needed to be healed to move forward. Some needed only to be carried. Together. And as the sun rose higher, Elijah turned to her, voice low but certain. "We stay." Annie nodded. "We live." Out here, land isn't just soil and sky. It's memory. It's sacrifice. And sometimes, it's the bond between 2 broken people finding a reason to keep going. If this story spoke to you, if you believe in resilience, trust, and the quiet power of standing your ground, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you'd fight to protect, and who you'd become if you did.